Leviticus 27:30 has some great nuggets of truth in it. Yet pastors seem to focus on just one of those nuggets. Pastors will tell their congregations when they're teaching on the tithe that the tithe is the Lord's. And that is a precious nugget, and it's a wonderful nugget. But the pastors do not tell the truth when it comes to Leviticus chapter 27 and verse 30. They don't tell the whole truth, and in omitting part of the truth, then the truth that they give is actually becomes a lie. Because they take and pull that verse, that particular nugget out of the verse and out of context. And tonight we're going to look at the context, or today we're going to look at the context of Leviticus chapter 27 and verse 30. Leviticus 27 verse 30 says, "And all the tithe of the land, whether the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy unto the Lord." And all the tithe. What did God mean when he said all of the tithe? The word tithe is translated from the Greek ma'aser. It means a tenth or a tenth part. God was speaking of a tenth or a tenth part of something. But a tenth part of what? Of the land. A tenth part of the land? What land is God speaking of in this verse? For the answer to this question, we must leave this text for the present time and visit the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy. In Exodus 3:17 we read, "And I have said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt unto the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, unto a land flowing with milk and honey." And in Deuteronomy 12, verse 1, "These are the statutes and judgments which ye shall observe to do in the land which the Lord God of thy fathers giveth thee to possess it all the days that ye live upon the earth." Deuteronomy 12:10, "But when ye go over Jordan and dwell in the land which the Lord your God giveth you to inherit, and when he giveth you rest from all your enemies round about, so that ye dwell in safety," verse 11, then there shall be a place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. Thither shall ye bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the heave offerings of your hand, and all your choice vows which ye vow unto the Lord." Did you catch that? Tithing is to be observed in the land that God gave to the children of Israel to possess. God is not speaking of just any geographical location in the world here. He is speaking of the land of Canaan, the land promised to Jacob and in Genesis chapter 28, verses 13 and 15. Let's go there for a minute. Genesis 28:13, "And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord, God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. That was Genesis chapter 28, verses 13 through 15. Now let's go back to Leviticus 27:30 again. And all the tithe of the land. God is speaking of a specific location. He's not speaking of North America. He's not speaking of South America. He's not speaking of the European countries. He's not speaking of Australia, Germany, Soviet Union. He's speaking of the land that's flowing with milk and honey, the land of Canaan. God's speaking of Canaan. God said his tithe is not to come from any location in the world except the promised land. Let's continue. Whether it be of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree. At the beginning of the verse, God said all the tithe. He did not say some of the tithe. He did not say a part of the tithe. He said all of the tithe. All of the tithe is to come from the promised land. This leaves no room for private interpretation. All of the tithe is to come from within the borders of Canaan and from nowhere else. The tithe is to come from the seed of the land and of the fruit of the tree. This is agricultural, not monetary. God said all the tithe is agricultural. Again, the text leaves no room for private interpretation. The text clearly says God's tithe is to come from seed and fruit. God's tithe is agricultural. Let's continue. It is the Lord's. The 10th part of the agricultural crops belong to God. Why? Well, it's holy unto the Lord. How is the tithe holy? Why is the tithe holy? Well, remember the promise God made to Jacob back in Genesis chapter 28, verses 13 through 15? Well, Jacob's response to God when Jacob awoke from his dream is the reason that God said his tithe is holy. Notice, Genesis 28 again, verses 20 through 22. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee. Now Jacob said, if God will give me bread to eat, and clothes, and a raiment to put on, that God would give him a 10th of it back. Clearly Jacob was speaking of something that comes from agriculture. Your clothes, the clothes come from agricultural products. They come from the cotton in the field. They come from the leather from the cattle, and so on and so forth. Of course in Jacob's time, or in the Bible times, they also wore camel clothes and lamb clothes and such. So it was skins of animals, and it was cotton from the field that made their robes and such. And so Jacob was saying, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you an agricultural tithe back. Jacob's vow to give God a 10th of that which God promised to give him. God's promise was to give Jacob the land of Canaan. And Jacob promised to give a 10th of the agricultural products back to God. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 21. When thou shalt vow a vow unto the Lord thy God, thou shalt not slack to pay it. For the Lord thy God will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee. Jacob had vowed to give God a tenth part of the land back to God. That tenth is the tithe that God required of the children of Israel in Leviticus 27:30. The tithe was holy, set apart for God by the patriarch Jacob. That's what the word holy means, set apart. And God was simply laying claim to that which Jacob had vowed would be God's. In closing, Leviticus chapter 27:30 has absolutely nothing to do with a tithe of one's monetary income. It was strictly speaking of an agricultural tithe in a specific geographic location. It has nothing to do with the Christian church tithing. It's speaking of Israel, the children of Israel, in the promised land.